for a little bit just before we know we're actually gone live, because you never quite know how long it takes to go live. So, welcome to the 10K Collective podcast, a subset of the amazing FBA family. We are on our live today with Patrick from Branded. We're going to talk about challenger brands, which I think is a very, very cool topic. And we'll tell you more about it in a second. So, Patrick, thank you so much for coming on live with us.
Great to be here.
Where are you coming to us from in the world out of interest?
We are dual headquartered in New York and Paris, and I happen to be in New York today.
What a cool couple of headquarters that is. I like it. Dual headquarters in London and Paris, and London, sorry, New York and Paris. You're missing in London there, but I guess London isn't as cool as it used to be.
We do have a team in London too,
You
so
do?
we are
Oh,
global.
yeah, excellent. Well, so folks, if you're listening live at this or watching on the replay, we're going to be talking with people who buy businesses all the time and have a real overview of the market for buying and selling e-commerce businesses, for e-commerce as a whole. So if you've got any intelligent questions on that topic, not on random topics, please feel free to pop them into the comments below, and we'll weave them into the podcast if they, make sense. Other than that, we're going to plunge into this topic, which I'm really looking forward to talking about. I think it's a very, very interesting, way of looking at the landscape, which I think is quite original, and that's quite something to be fresh and original when it comes to talking about buying and selling Amazon businesses, because that's been a much discussed topic. So looking forward to this. Patrick, are you ready to roll and record this as a podcast?
Let's go.
Excellent. So camera back to me, and here we go. Labels and jelly spoons, boys and girls, welcome back to the 10K Collective podcast, a subset of the amazing FBA family of podcasts. I'm your host, Michael Veazey. Today we are talking about challenger brands. What are they, and what does that mean for everyone who's in the e-commerce space? We're talking with Patrick O'Connell, who's the Chief Strategy Officer of Branded, an e-commerce aggregator focused on challenger brands. First of all, warm welcome to the show, Patrick. Thanks for coming on.
Great to be here, Michael.
Yeah, you too. So let's talk about today's topic. What on earth is a challenger brand? Can you define that for us?
Sure. So it's a term of art that we've sort of developed, I guess. And in our definition of a challenger brand is a brand that is small, could be $10+ million in revenue, but it super serves a core consumer, and it has the ability in our minds to get to $100 million. And so these are the types of brands that we look to invest behind.
Excellent. So that sounds like on the higher end of the sort of people that I end up serving in the 10K Collective Mastermind. So, and some of the people listening, or at least they can aspire to get there. So obviously you're thinking quite big picture terms. So for you, US dollars of turnover of 10 million is quite small.
Mhm.
You're looking for to grow them to 100 million or more. So that sounds quite sort of highfalutin, kind of ambitious.
Mhm.
Why does that matter for the average e-commerce seller, shall we say?
Yeah, I think it's useful to kind of unpack it a little bit. Why do challenger brands matter, and why do they exist? And I think there's some key takeaways for folks who are in the market selling products. And so I think as we think about the evolution of the consumer products market, we've really moved from a closed system to an open system. Closed system being, it used to be you had to sort of beg and plead Walmart to get onto their shelves. It took a lot of time, a lot of capital. They controlled the aisles. Amazon has obviously democratized that. It's the same thing on the media side. To acquire customers, you used to have to sort of spend hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of dollars on TV advertising, et cetera. Now it's an open system with social media providing direct access. And so while the market has been radically democratized, so the barriers to entry are very, very low. So you can scale e-commerce businesses profitably from very low levels. So that's amazing, right? And a lot of your audience has done this. They've done the proverbial 0 to 1. They've created something out of nothing. These businesses are now doing hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars in annual revenue, and that is amazing. But the flip side of that is, it is an open system now. Everyone can compete, so the market is very crowded. And so what our point of view is, or our thesis is that in these open systems, the value in the value chain is shifting towards the creative class, right? So it used to be that, if you were a tinkerer or a creator, it's hard to create a product and sell it. Now, with crowdfunding sites, with open e-commerce platforms, open social or open advertising platforms on social media, search media, et cetera, anyone can sort of launch these, products. And so, we think there's a real opportunity, but it's harder to launch a product than it is just have the creative class on the media side, where it's the barriers to entry are a little bit easier because it's a camera, it's a microphone, it's a video, what have you. And so there's a need for someone in the market to provide a platform of services for these creatives to launch products. And so that's where Branded comes in, and that's where we look to partner with some of these entrepreneurs who have created unique products that stand out in the market, that have unique branding that we define as sort of challenger brands, that they may only have 1 million or 5 million or 10 million of revenue today, but they're in markets that are big enough and the products are special enough and the brands are differentiated enough to have the potential runway to get to $100 million. And that's how we think about the opportunity.
Yeah, interesting. And I like the big picture thinking and the kind of courageousness of the size of the vision because I think there are the classic error that people fall into is excessive optimism, isn't it? When they're sort of newbies and they're looking at a market, and just because somebody's doing $1 million a month doesn't mean any percentage of that's going to be yours or that it's going to be profitable if it is. So that's the classic beginner error. But the other error is underestimating the size of what we got. And I've seen, and I was kind of amazed to observe firsthand some of the brands we've had through the 10K Collective Mastermind grow from, I think, like about $2 to $3 million a year revenue to about 25,
Mm-hmm.
which I find mind blowing. And they have the ambition now, which I don't think they used to, the vision that they could get to 100 million, and that feels real, which is an incredible thought, isn't it? Um, so let me ask you another question about the brands themselves. And so you got a view of the marketplace as a whole, the
Mm-hmm.
potential. Why do
Mm-hmm.
challenger brands matter? What do they actually do for in the marketplace? How do they change the marketplace?
Yeah, I think they super serve a specific customer. So if you think about the large CPG companies out there, they've spent the last several decades really consolidating supply chains and consolidating products so that they've got these big products that are meant to be everything to everybody. So if you're a Procter and Gamble selling, dish detergent or toothpaste or what have you, they've created these massive brands that the brands aren't relevant to them unless they're doing billions of dollars in revenue. But you can't be all things to all people. And so we think over time, in the same way that media has become fragmented with the advent of the internet, with the advent of open systems as I've described on Amazon and social and search media, there's an opportunity to create kind of more narrowly defined brands that are super serving a specific, target audience. So it could be, if Gillette was convincing people for the last few decades that to be the best a man can get, you had to sort of have a clean shaven face. Well, now there's people who want to grow beards, and there's different types of beard hair. And so there's a market now for beard oil. And so we've got a brand that caters to a very narrow market of African-American men with beard oil, some other products now built around that, et cetera. So because you're able to have these small businesses that can scale profitably from very small levels, you can super serve these smaller buckets of consumers. And so you're sort of slicing the pie more thinly, but in effect, taking share from these mega brands that don't really speak to anyone directly. They're just mega brands.
Yeah, so I guess it's the logical conclusion of, I don't know if you read The Long Tail by Chris Anderson when it came out in about 2007. Incredibly
Mm-hmm.
prophetic because Amazon's really implemented that, haven't they, in this narrower e-commerce space, if you will. And I suppose
Mm-hmm.
you're talking about the wider retail space. And I guess that separation between is starting to feel very artificial, isn't it? Because brands that didn't used to take the internet seriously only had to have experience of the pandemic for a year and then they suddenly did. So I guess we're in a different world now in terms of that division between online and offline. Would you say that's now irrelevant, or would you say actually we still got a head start if we've started online? Is there such a thing as a digitally native business, or is that an irrelevant concept?
I think there's such thing as a digitally native business. That's a business that started online. I think the coin of the realm right now is really about customer relationships, however. And so I think whether you're, an old line CPG company or whether you're a digitally native brand, that's what you're driving towards. You're trying to establish that customer relationship. It can be harder to do if Walmart's sitting between you and the customer. It can be hard to do if Amazon's sitting between you and the customer. It's quote easier to do if you're a direct to consumer brand, but obviously more expensive as well. And so I think part of being a part of where we see the value in trying to create these challenger brands is that they speak more deeply to people. So no one has a emotional relationship with, I'll make something up, not to pick on a brand, but Crest toothpaste, for example. But there are smaller, more niche brands where people have built communities around a specific toothpaste or a hair care product or what have you that is super serving a particular audience, building community around those brands. That is something that's really unique, and oftentimes or almost inevitably comes from an entrepreneur that is plugged into a certain community or a certain zeitgeist amongst a group of people, and can create these brands that serve that particular community. And I think what we've also seen is over time, the younger demographic, they care about where their products come from, the mission of the products, how they're sourced, kind of the ethos of the brand, et cetera. And so I think that has been a sea change that's happened over the course of the last 10 years, and we think will continue. And so having brands that speak more deeply to people is important, especially for the younger generation.
Yeah, that's a common thing that I hear from really expert marketers. So if I'm not going to mention another aggregator, but somebody else who we had on who's very, very good on the marketing was talking about that. And of course, the young consumers of today are the majority, or even everyone eventually, I guess, as well. So it's kind of future proof in that way, I guess. So I guess you've started hinting about one of the ways, how do we create this, actual challenger brand is what I want to focus on for the rest of this episode. You've hinted already about people who are, entrepreneurs are plugged into a certain community. And we've had, for example, somebody on, I don't think they were allowed to use the word for legal reasons when we interviewed them, but CrossFit. And that's a
Mm-hmm.
very obsessive type user, and their
Yes.
products speak directly to them. And they've
Mm-hmm.
absolutely nailed something in a space which, frankly, is utterly commoditized,
Right.
which is an amazing success. So, how do we begin to do that? Do you think, let me deal with that first idea first. Do we actually have to be, as the entrepreneur or founder, co-founder, a member of the target market, or is that only one of the routes in?
I think it's one of the roots in. I think that the comment I'd make there is that authenticity is absolutely critical. I think, the internet, as someone said to me recently, the internet smells a fraud immediately. I think we can probably all collectively agree that we live in sort of almost a post-truth era right now. And so anyone trying to sell something that's not real is going to be immediately called out. So I think authenticity is key. Being a member of that community is potentially very important as a leg in. But you can define communities very broadly too, right? And so it could be as thin as a brand that is female founded and has that sort of ethos built into it. It can be that. It doesn't have to be that you're a member of some small sect that sort of only converses amongst themselves, right? And people, everyone's unique, and we all sort of are members of multiple communities, quote unquote. You're just trying to pluck at people's kind of heartstrings around topics and ideas that matter to them.
Yeah, you make a good point that we're all members of quotes multiple tribes, especially online where you don't need to be limited by geography. And yeah, it's good to know that we don't have to be all as obsessive as CrossFit is. Because I was just thinking, am I obsessed enough with areas? And I guess my background in classical music would be yes, but a lot of people listening wouldn't necessarily have that kind of obsessive community ready to roll.
Mhm.
Okay, so what else do we need to be doing to create a genuine challenger brand? I guess one thing that strikes me, and I'd love your thoughts on this. What I love about the size of the vision, if you like, that you're bringing is that you could knock, Procter and Gamble in their sort of toothpaste or home product space, or a L'Oreal in the makeup space off their pedestal by taking, big enough chunk out of their, revenue to make a big difference to multi-billion-dollar brands in some cases. Um, eh, so how do we know whether what we've got has the potential for that versus it's just a nice little niche, we filled it,
Mhm.
we're serving it well, and that's it, is going to be a $10 million a year business, and that's the maximum.
Yeah, I think it's a multi-layered cake, and I think for us foundationally we look at the size of the market, and so we play in certain verticals. For example, beauty and personal care is a big business of ours, and so we're very attuned to the market and what's trending. So step one is entering a market that is growing itself, and typically you will it's always easier when the wind's at your back than at your in your face. And so there are certain supplement categories, there are certain kind of personal care categories that are very much in kind of growth mode. So being in a growth category is step one, and then narrowly defining either the product and or the customer base is step two. And so you're not trying to compete with, soap brand X, but there's something unique about the product. So I'll make something up that sounds kind of silly. Maybe it's too narrow, but you could imagine an SPF, a skin cream that is made to work especially well at high altitude because the sun is more powerful there. I'm making stuff up. It could be for, skiers potentially. I don't know. I happen to ski, so that would maybe resonate with me. But generally speaking, when you find that sort of like niche, then you become known for that thing. Then you can build a little bit horizontally, and that's part of the sauce, part of the secret sauce that we look for in some of the entrepreneurs that we partner with. There's something that's typically you see it's the one product that sort of gets you on the map, and then you can start to build a brand more horizontally around that.
Great. And so by horizontally, you mean, because people in sort of corporate speak love to talk about horizontal and vertical everything, horizontal, vertical integration.
Mm-hmm.
So vertical, horizontal meaning not so much in the same, I suppose you call it vertical when in corporate speak. So the same product category, but a related one, but not the same. So instead of skin cream, it would be, I don't know what would be
Hair
next for you
care,
as a skier. Hair care for
right?
skiers.
It's the
Post
same
ski,
one,
yeah.
right? The same umbrella
Yeah,
brand.
yeah.
It holds the same appeal and ethos to the audience, but instead of selling someone the SPF cream, it could be, specialized hand lotion for people with, eczema or what have you.
Yeah. Interesting. Now, what you just said sounds like you're focused on the market there because the same person, the skier, might need an SPF, it's cream that works particularly well at high altitudes.
Mm-hmm.
And I can imagine actually a very aspirational aspect to that brand that would appeal to a lot of people who don't ski but think they would like to. And a bit like everyone who wears Nike trainers doesn't tend to actually run very much,
Right.
etc. Right. So I can see how
Mm-hmm.
that could get quite big. But then the horizontal thing sounds to me, okay, the production, even the product development, the production, even the physical location of production for a skin cream. If I was selling it in the US, I'd probably get it made in the US. I would
Mm-hmm.
expect to jump through FDA approval, etc. It would be expensive to create the formula, but then probably per unit very cheap.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if I'm getting hair care products, maybe it's completely different supply chain. So I guess what you're implying there is that you're going to specialize by the customer base and become known for that. Now, that makes a lot of sense. And as a marketing driven person myself, who doesn't love supply chain side,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know anyone who does, but some people are good at it, then
We love
that
supply chains.
resonates.
We love supply chains.
Yeah. But here's what I would say though. Given the era we're moving into, where, for example, Shanghai is shut down as a city of 26 million people on lockdown, I've got
Mm-hmm.
clients who can't ship stuff in from there. We're going to more expensive oil. We've got, all sorts of geopolitical ramifications that mean the supply chain is going to be more challenging. My challenge to you is that, okay, does it make sense to create a brand on that way, or do we need to think more about the supply side than marketing than we used to, or do you think that the same logic applies as it used to?
So as I think about sort of the two ends of the supply chain, the consumer at one end and the product development at the other, you got to meet somewhere in the middle. I think is our view. It just so happens that at Branded we happen to be focused on three verticals. So beauty and personal care being one, health and wellness being a second, and home and kitchen being a third. The home and kitchen, generally those products are sourced from China. So you've got the difficulties that you described in terms of ocean freight and the lockdowns in China currently, et cetera. On the other two categories, they're generally U.S. sourced products, so you don't have that same degree of supply chain complications. So I would say on and frankly, that's part of the reason we like those two kind of verticals better, since you don't have to sort of play in that realm. The other thing I'd say is as I think about your audience and people potentially coming onto our platform as entrepreneurs, if you were building an aggregator that was primarily focused on sourcing products from China into the US, you would need to build a platform, but the platform would be really focused on that supply chain side, right? It would be sort of a thinner platform, as I describe it, in terms of sort of like the value add or the services added. For a branded company like us, where we're engaging with consumers on Amazon, off Amazon, et cetera, the platform that we've built is, I would describe it as a little bit thicker, meaning it's got to have additional value added services on there. And frankly, they're the same services that a CPG company would be providing, right? So it's brand strategist, it's new product development, it's integrated supply chains here in the US, et cetera. And so it's a heavier lift, I would say. But we think in order to create the long-term value, you have to be there. And that's kind of our orientation towards the market. And so as we look across the FBA and D2C space, we are looking for those sort of the superstars that have created something unique, whether the product itself is unique or the brand is unique. Usually it's both. They don't necessarily are independent. And where there's maybe a dearth of capital or certain expertise in certain areas, what have you, we can bring that to bear. And because we are vertically focused, we have category level resources. So internal counsel around regulatory compliance and advertising claims, et cetera. Those are the type of things that we specialize in.
That makes a lot of sense. And I guess one of the big barriers to entry, I haven't done it, but I've got lots of clients and friends who've done the supplements route. And it always strikes me that the regulatory lift, if you like, is the biggest barrier to entry, which, by the way, is a great thing. If there are no barriers to entry, according to a book that I've been absorbing with great interest, of still trying to digest, Porter's, I think it's 1970s, but still holds
Yeah,
the
sure.
competitive
Very
challenge,
relevant.
the competitive factors that make an industry as a whole, likely to be lower, middle, higher profit, and how you set your strategy. I
Mm-hmm.
guess that having a barrier to entry is really nice as long as you're on the right side of it. So if you guys can help with that because you specialize, that great makes a great deal of sense. And
Yes.
I suppose what you're saying, if I'm hearing you right, is something along the lines that a strong enough brand has enough strength that you're willing to weather the supply chain issues that happen to come with it. But all things being equal, you'd rather be sourcing the US to sell in the US, etc. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Great. I mean, which makes sense. I mean, I yeah, been following with great interest the work of people like Peter Zion, who's an American. He gets the international global situation, which is pretty unusual, and if I may say
Mm-hmm.
so. And he totally gets it. And I think he's predicted the war in Ukraine. And I do think that the supply chain side is something that people don't address directly unless it's what they think of as a temporary blip. And I think seeing it as a longer term thing is becoming bigger and bigger structural part of whether a business is going to be viable. That's my take on it. What's your take on, say, the kitchen side, where lockdowns in China and more to the point, longer term issues in global movements of goods are an issue?
Yeah.
What's your take on that? Are you trying to move away from that, or do you kind of take that in your stride?
Um, I would say we take it in stride for now. We're in that business. I think you just have to be a little bit more cautious there. I think the barriers to entry, to your point, are a little bit lower. You're effectively competing, or actually, in some cases, competing with your suppliers, who every year become more sophisticated. They can sell on Amazon themselves, et cetera. And so, unless you've got something that's different or special in terms of the product, or you're really innovating the product, um, you're going to be at the mercy of a much, much more competitive market. And frankly, it's one of the things we see across all of e-commerce as well. I come from a finance and capital markets background as well. And so those are very, very efficient markets. If you think about it from an economic perspective, I view Amazon similarly, which is it's an incredibly efficient and competitive market. And so I think what you're seeing product development cycles accelerate. There's all sorts of third-party tools. We have them. We're developing some proprietary tools on top of that. Other people are as well. You can see changes in the market extraordinarily quickly, and people can move on those, and you can develop products very, very fast. So if you're kind of a big CPG company, it's probably taking you 12 months, 18 months, maybe longer to launch a product. At Branded, we've launched whole new brands and products within the span of months, 4 or 5 months, when we see opportunities. And so I think having those capabilities internally, whether you're an aggregator or whether you're just a seller, thinking about product development and faster cycle times, it's just the nature of this game right now. It's going to become more competitive over time.
Yeah, and you make a very interesting point about the competitive landscape. I've always thought of Amazon as basically Amazon did for e-commerce what the stock market did for stocks, many centuries
Mm-hmm.
before, I guess. But so tell me about this. I guess that's what Porter would call, was it forward integration? So in other words, if your suppliers sell to you and you sell to Amazon,
Yeah.
formerly it would have been your suppliers sell to you, you sell to some small mom and shops times 1,000, or maybe Walmart, and then they sell to the
Hmm.
consumer, right? So we've
Hmm.
removed one link in the supply chain, made it cheaper than the consumer, but created hyper competition for ourselves. And you
Hmm.
mentioned the fact that Chinese suppliers have a habit of selling direct to Amazon. Why would they not?
Of course.
What about American suppliers? Are they not, as American retailers, as I understand it, at the fastest rate since the Second World War, and
Hmm.
already in the supplement space? They're the place. If it goes on or in your skin, they say don't source from China, famously. So
Hmm.
what is the danger level of, say, a supplement supplier just bypassing us as brand creators and going direct to Amazon? And if
Hmm.
the danger is intense, what do we do about it?
Yeah. So I think one key point of difference between the maybe kitchen product sourced from China and a skincare brand sourced in the U.S. is the degree to which the brand matters to the consumer. And so I think Amazon's a very tactical market from a marketing standpoint in certain respects. And so that can all be mostly replicated, whether you're sitting in the US or China. So a Chinese factory can sell a set of kind of plastic dishware, you know, as effectively as anyone for the most part, right? Maybe cheaper because the labor costs are lower there. And so, but in the US, I think consumers, they care about where skin products are sourced or supplements are sourced, and so they generally sort of prefer a U.S. source product. So it begs the question that you just raised, which is, well, geez, like you could have a co-manufacturer or manufacturer in the U.S. selling online, and we have seen some of that. Frankly, we've seen more brands integrate themselves, meaning like have their own manufacturing as opposed to the manufacturers selling on Amazon. But because there's that additional threshold of kind of having a brand out there, it's generally difficult for a manufacturing organization to develop that muscle. It's a little bit unnatural for them. We've seen on occasion some do it. It's just a lot harder. And so typically they try to just kind of stick to their knitting. And frankly, from some of the businesses I've seen in that space, they operate on relatively decent margins. So their core businesses are okay.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess that the assumption that I'm making as well is that they would want to sell direct to consumer, and of course, one of the things we've had discussions on the program is when somebody's developed a good brand that works business to consumer. So selling on Amazon primarily for most of the people we work with, they could actually swing around and sell it to Walmart or the big box retailers, which still exist, of course. And so,
Mhm.
when you can get 100,000 units per order, it creates a cash flow problem. But on the other hand, it's a big chunky addition of revenue. So yes, I take your point. Maybe the US suppliers don't want to become direct to consumer experts. It's interesting. Would you say that's more the barrier, or do you just think they know that they're not good at it?
I think it's a matter of capabilities and focus ultimately, and the core business being kind of strong enough and profitable enough. I mean, frankly, that business has been growing in the U.S. for many years. So there's not that strategic or sort of capital imperative to kind of get out of their current business. The current
Yeah, it
business is
makes sense.
actually reasonably strong.
Yeah, it's funny how to a man with a hammer all things look like a nail. I guess you and I are looking at the direct to consumer market and how it's blown up and the opportunity. But then I guess, there are risks attached with changing your business model, as you say. Now, you mentioned the opposite, which I guess is, if you call it backwards integration. Look at this, all these
Mhm.
backwards, forwards, and vertical integration
Right.
mumbo jumbo we're talking today. In other
Mhm.
words, if you sell supplements and you've been buying them from some manufacturer in Ohio, whatever, and you live in Ohio and you think, I could hire the same guys and use, I've got the patents that we own and I could set up manufacturing myself. So do you see that happening more, or is that just an edge case?
I think yes, we see it as a viable strategy. Whether I see it happening more, it's a tough question to answer because I think it's not relevant for someone who's a small seller on Amazon. You've got to get to obviously a certain degree of scale for that to be relevant for you. But I do think it makes strategic sense for people at a certain scale because, as I mentioned, there's real margin in some of those manufacturing businesses, and so it makes sense. And frankly, if you think about the Amazon ecosystem, uh, everyone on the Amazon platform is renting Amazon's scale essentially. So the only additional margin you can bring to Amazon is if on the gross margin side, if you can sort of source more cheaply than your competitors, that's a point of differentiation that could be very valuable. on a market as competitive as Amazon.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, that's one of the sort of competitive forces that Porter talks about. Again, I just find it a useful framework. It's not the only way of looking at it, but one is, yeah, if you have a very efficient market like Amazon, which tends to push down on the prices to the point where everyone's more or less break even, and the
Mm-hmm.
Chinese, by the way, seem to be happy to sell at break even or below as far as we can reverse engineer their costs. It's a whole different world, right? It's not really
Yeah.
a capitalist, profit driven system from what I can tell. But when you're dealing with supplements, people still not to money margin, but there is price downwards competition. So I'd imagine that the importance of stripping out the cost becomes ever higher as a way to maintain margins. And do you think that that's something more brand owners are going to go into in future because of that imperative?
I think possibly in certain categories, beauty being another that I think could be relevant because there are products with for the most part higher margins, and so that can make sense. The other comment I'd make kind of more broadly about we're talking about how competitive Amazon is as a marketplace that's worth noting is that there's been a ton of capital formation that's gone into not just aggregators, but D2C brands, et cetera, who are selling D2C, but also now on Amazon. They consider themselves to be kind of e-commerce centric or even omni-channel from the get-go in some cases. But as more capital comes into the market, it's harder to compete, meaning you have people taking longer views of owning a certain category on Amazon. So if rewind the clock 10 years ago, you could launch a product for, I'll make up a number, $100,000, but you would quickly, get to break even and earn your capital back and start earning returns on that capital. Uh, Given how massive Amazon's market is, and the third-party marketplace is going to be, $1 trillion in the next handful of years. I don't know exactly sure when, but it'll be that size market. And if you've got a market that is that big, and you've got a view that having a review moat, right? More reviews than the next guy, that's really valuable, and there's more capital at play. You could see people putting additional marketing resources and be willing to lose more money over a longer period of time to quote control that shelf space on Amazon. And so I think it's one of the competitive dynamics that if you're a smaller seller on Amazon, you've got to have in mind, because as larger and better capitalized firms come into the market, they will view owning that prime shelf space, which is effectively the number of reviews that you have, as a more and more important strategic imperative, and will be willing to pay for it, and they'll pay for it vis-a-vis losing money in order to gain share to own that space and then make the profits back over a longer period of time.
Yeah, what you're saying entirely ties in with what I've observed, just even from the number of aggregators and forgive the name, but whatever acquirers of businesses and people putting together bigger and better funded, to the main point,
Mm-hmm.
entities in the e-commerce space on the selling side. In other words, the implication is pretty simple: more money sloshing in. People with deeper pockets can afford to wait longer till they make their cash back, depending
Mm-hmm.
on the covenants they have with their funders, of course, which you're
Mm-hmm.
an expert in. But
Mm-hmm.
nevertheless, longer than most of us probably who are self-funded. So it does say to me that you need to get big or get out, or possibly sell out, which is one of the other implications. But you guys offer a slightly different route, don't you? So tell us a little bit about. You mentioned, you sort of hinted at what you guys do
Mm-hmm.
with brands or in conjunction with
Yep.
brands at branded.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't sound like you just buy them and then that's the end of the story.
Correct.
So tell us a little bit more about your view of how you work with people.
Yeah, so I think we are uniquely situated in the market, I think, for a certain type of seller. And so we're looking for one of kind of three archetypes, which I'll get into in a second, but we do not sort of buy the business and fire the entrepreneur or the founder. We think there's an incredible amount of sort of value in IP. If I could sort of use a coarse sort of economic word to describe it. Typically this is someone who understands the consumer extraordinarily well, understands the product really well, has a product roadmap in their head in terms of how to grow, really understands the competitive dynamic in the market broadly, but on Amazon specifically. And so we see a tremendous amount of value in having them on the platform. And so generally speaking, when we buy businesses, we also bring the entrepreneur on board. They have the joystick, I like to say. So they still control the business. We own it, but they're running it day to day. And we give them essentially a retained equity stake on an economic basis in that business. And so over the course of 2 or 3 years, they will and will construct ratcheted incentive payments. So the faster they grow, obviously, the more they make, and there's a multiple on exit. And we think that model aligns interests, and we think it makes for frankly, a better product, because you've got sort of the fundamental kind of building blocks of what made the business and the product, work to begin with, and you're just kind of turbocharging that with capital and/or additional resources. But it's not for everyone, right? A lot of sellers just like, I just want my cash and go away.
Yeah.
If that's the case, that's great. We're probably not your buyer, although we do that on occasion as well. But we really look for those sort of specials. And I mentioned sort of the 3 archetypes. I'll go through them real quickly. And if I look back over the acquisitions that we've made, they kind of fall into sort of 3 buckets. So the entrepreneurs tend to be, one bucket is just Amazon wizards. These are folks, kind of guerrilla marketing, growth hacking, Amazon kind of gurus that are able to kind of have sort of swashbuckled through the Amazon jungle in one, right? Bringing that DNA onto our platform and institutionalizing it is really valuable. So we like those type of entrepreneurs. The second type are what I call kind of the product gurus. These are folks that just have a passion for whatever it is. And in one case, we have someone on our platform who is a clean freak, and who has and develops kind of a plant-based brand, both the home and personal care brand called Puracy. Sean could go chapter and verse on the ingredients in the soap and what makes it more viscous and what makes it more bubbly. Like, that is really valuable, right? Because he's also got a product roadmap over the next kind of few years that we can turbocharge. So we like entrepreneurs like that a lot. And then the third category I call sort of the marketing gurus or influencers. And these are typically people who oftentimes have YouTube channels, and they're kind of influencer is kind of a dirty word as well, but they're sort of a guru, I would say, in a particular space. We looked at one brand, and the individual was one of the world's foremost experts in a very sort of narrow category of nutrition, and had a massive following on YouTube. And we really like that, because if you're solely reliant on Amazon or Facebook, God forbid, post Apple's kind of monkey wrench, it's going to be very hard to acquire customers profitably. So you need some sort of unique angle, and that content that lives forever on YouTube, and those kind of gurus are very, very powerful.
I like
and
it.
very valuable. We like those as well.
I like your optimism. Content that lives forever on insert social media platform here. YouTube feels like the safest for sure. It's been around
Yes.
since 2007, I guess. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I just a couple of reflections. I love your optimism that you can quote institutionalize a guerrilla marketing person. I mean, somebody who's into guerrilla marketing and swashbuckling, which brings up the pirates for a British person. That doesn't sound like a very institutionalizable person. Having said which, the British Crown did kind of give people license to be kind of state pirates on behalf of the British, and I suppose the
Mm-hmm.
Dutch did the same. So there is some
Mm-hmm.
history for it. Yeah, I guess you got to manage those people in a certain way. I know some people like that in the Amazon ecosystem. They're always
Yes.
entertaining, but they're kind
Yes.
of like loose cannons. But the product gurus, I can totally understand the value of that, because if they really, really, really understand a very specific product category, that's really awkward stuff to find, right? It can take a long time. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
blow up like a social media channel, right? You've got to have your mistakes
Mm-hmm.
and have your products with 1-star reviews and your disgusted consumers and the old gummed up factory works and delayed
Mm-hmm.
orders before you find that, right? So I can understand the value of that massively. And then the
Mm-hmm.
marketing gurus, yeah, of course, as you say, the broader the reach, the less channel specific they are, that the less channel risk you have, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
So that
Yeah.
totally makes sense. So it sounds like, so who do you guys work with then? So I've got a very clear sense in the broader sense. Is it specifically only for, you mentioned the 3 sort of categories, home and kitchen, health and wellness, personal care. So you're
Mm-hmm.
limited to those particular markets. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Correct. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we like those markets because generally you can build brands around those products. Harder
Absolutely.
to do so around commoditized products, obviously. So that's part of our thesis.
Very smart. And so, so who would you say is if people are, interested by what you say and think that that might be some kind of partnership for them? Let's define a little bit more. Who do you want to hear from, or who would benefit from talking to you guys?
Yeah, if you're out there and you've got a brand that's doing even 3 to 5 million, but if it's truly different, if the products are unique, you've got you're super serving a particular consumer, we'd love to talk to you. and you can access our website. It's joinbranded.com. You can hit me up personally on LinkedIn. I'm pretty responsive there. But so I mentioned sort of challenger brand taking from 10 million, and hopefully, again, it's aspirational, but we want the market to be big enough that they could grow kind of 10x. But the reality is you start seeing that acceleration, between sort of 5 and 10 million. And so we look at businesses at that size all the time.
Wow, I love that. Very interesting and inspiring way of looking at the market, and also a bit of a warning to everyone else that we all need to be aware of the ecosystem we're working in. If somebody else is creating an incredible challenger brand and the CPG companies are willing to also come in and throw some money at the problem, we're all in that market, so we've got to find somebody with some capital and expertise to help us, I guess. And if you are the person for them, then I'm sure you'll get very grateful entrepreneurs. Well, look, Patrick, it's been a fascinating conversation. I know we're going to be talking to a colleague of yours shortly about other aspects of your work.
Mhm.
But it's fantastic conversation, very thought provoking. Slightly humbling that 10 million is a small brand. I guess that it's all relative, right? But any final points that you think we haven't covered that you think people should know?
No, it's been great to be here, Michael. I appreciate your time.
Pleasure. No, thank you so much for coming on. Okay, folks, that's our recording done. We're going to be talking with Alexis on some other topics later about the whole business of getting a brand acquired and stuff. But for the moment, thank you for watching and listening with us. If you've been with us, and Patrick O'Connell from branded.com, thank you so much for coming on and sharing such interesting insights. Fantastic stuff.